All right, so for today we are continuing our discussion from last Wednesday about federal resume stuff. We kind of ended up class last session with a super simple, just kind of break the seal on the exercise of putting together your federal resume. And based on this highly recommended but not mandatory textbook for the semester, adopting a very, very specific format and filling that thing out as deeply as possible so that we can get some good things accomplished with your resume. So on the course website, as of earlier today, I organized and linked together some additional stuff very much along these same lines. So you'll hear and see a little bit of kind of repetition from last Wednesday's class in terms of, like, these are the sections, this is what you do first, this is how you sort of bulk out each section being like one prior employer, for example. So I've got, I don't know, a half dozen or so different previous example job listings just to help kind of re-underscore that idea of you never search for job title, you're looking for skill sets, you're looking for duty areas, stuff like that instead, because you can be doing any of the forestry specializations and a bunch of other different majors under very generic job titles. So don't spin your tires on sifting through things and getting frustrated that you don't see the particular job title that you're looking for. And then we also talked a little bit about some alums and how they figured out how to do this in the past, and by and large they're super excited to help you out and sort of give you insider track information if you're interested in reaching out to folks who have gone before and had to solve the same problems and who are now working with Forest Service, Park Service, etc. Or if you want to sort of use a process called surrogation, where you learn from somebody else's wins and failures so that you don't have to sort of repeat that. I've got a folder of like a half dozen, basically like short video interview conversations with alums when they come back for a visit to say hi. I'll say, hey, do you got 5 minutes? Can you let us know how many applications did you have to send out? Which were the ones that were successful for you? How many job postings were you choosing from when it came time to actually kind of pull the trigger on something and say no to some other stuff? So it helps to put kind of another human face on what is otherwise a big unbounded task. Like there's always going to be more job listings on USA Jobs. It can be super intimidating until you see, everybody else has had to figure this out too, and you're definitely smart enough to do this. So a lot of those are in the folder labeled 4 Learn Insider Tips from SIU alums and other forestry folks on applying federally. And it's mostly literally folks who have graduated from the same classes, same major, all that stuff as you're in right now. And they were successful, so let that be encouraging to you. On Wednesday, we talked through kind of the loose template of the outline format for your federal resume, which is sort of the main message of this right here, with a bunch of examples and template and all of that stuff, with the added advisory of go on USA Jobs, use the resume builder to create basically a bare bones template, just copying a bunch of gibberish text to function as placeholders. Download that file, and then work on that file yourself and format it yourself. Upload that properly controlled, beautiful, readable document. Put that on your hard drive, do your own thing with it, turn it into a PDF when you're ready, when you're finally good to go, and then send that off. Upload that instead of relying on the resume builders thing, because it's got some serious bugs in it. And the federal government has a hard time getting quality software custom made out of contractors. Everything always goes to the lowest bidder. So, control your particular application better than most other people are after you have finished writing it. So the assignment that's linked here says turn in your first draft or final if you've previously written it. I'm not going to make you like start over again. Upload it where it says Federal Resume Draft 1. It's just a D2L Dropbox, and the whole thing will be probably a page or less on your first draft. I'm just looking for like the first, most recent job recounting of your skill sets, skill clusters. The key accomplishments section at the end of that, remember, is 1 or 2 paragraphs in that very specific key accomplishments format as well. Okay? So just one of those, plus your header, like contact information. And then from there, it's a lot of rinse and repeat. And much of the process from my perspective as somebody who's like pulling alongside you to help you get this done and ready to go in these weeks is to basically catch little stuff that you're maybe not thinking about yet because you're mainly in the process of brain dumping lots and lots and lots of experience and volunteer work and classes and labs and all of the things that need to go in your federal resume. You're not necessarily thinking about things like polishing off the sentences and, triple checking spelling, catching homophones, stuff like that. There versus there versus there, for example, or your versus your, or you are. I can help catch that stuff pretty easily. So we're going to do a first draft here. That was what was assigned last Wednesday. It's not due right now, so you have a little bit of time. And we'll go through kind of 2 or 3 iterations of this until you got something that looks, really kind of like a resume. I'm not going to require anybody to fully finish out the whole thing because that is a lot of pages long. And for some of you guys and gals who just kind of know that you're not interested in putting together a federal resume, this would be kind of extra, as the Zoomers say. So I don't want to make you do work that's not directly contributing to your success. So we're going to go through like draft 1, draft 2, draft 3. And for those of you who want to go beyond that, catch me during office hours closer to the end of the semester. I'll sit down with you one-on-one or one-on small group and kind of help you get across the finish line with a full, neatly polished, ready to hit send resume. All right? So that kind of wraps up the conversation on that for the moment. Any questions on federal resume stuff? Has anybody sat down to start on this thing? And did you encounter anything you weren't planning on, or something that surprised you, or confused, or disheartened, or anything like that? Is it going all right? Okay, cool. Again, remember, this is a separate document than other resumes, but once this is done, it's super fast to cut this down to size for applying to Davy Tree or something like that with a 1 or 2 pager, and you're pretty well good to go. Okay? Cool. All right. Well, let's move on from there. So, we are talking about the human creature as a wildlife species in forest recreation management. Now, refresh me, just help me remember. I'm an old man, and I'm starting to lose grip on reality. Some would say I've already long ago lost. Anyway, hail, slanash, whatever. We've talked about a couple of different characteristic identifiers of forest recreation. Different ways that we can sort of group them and understand our recreationists visiting your national park this semester along different descriptors or handles or bins that we could group them into. So what were some of those bins, some of those characteristics that we kind of sort people out into different market segments if we were marketers, or demographics if we were demographers? What are some of those ways in which we identify the rich differences in our visitors while considering them a million at a time?
Location of certain attractions and stuff.
Yeah, all right, so we talked about the spatial distribution of use. We talked about the time or temporal distribution of use. on a daily scale, on a week-to-week plus scale, and on an annual scale. So groups that are identical functionally in their other characteristics, that are visiting a day trip park versus a week plus stay park, they're going to have different needs across those two different parks based on that time distribution of use and the time of year that they're going and the length of their stay and their mode of travel was another. Are they arriving in an RV, pulling a little Jeep? Are they arriving in their Civic, stuffed to the gills with camping stuff? Are they arriving on horses? Or via float plane? Or ferry? Or cruise ship? All of those things are just grouped under mode of travel, for example. Okay? So we've got some other things that we want to consider for our... Pass that around and look through it if you want. Other things that we want to consider for kind of understanding the makeup, the composition, the characteristic differences of, let's see, there we go. Let's close a bunch of this stuff so these files will run a little bit better on my old iPad. All right. All right, so now that we got access to a projector and a screen for today, let's take a look at a couple of examples. Maybe you can see them a little bit better than just me like flashing around the iPad and so forth, to get a sense of how some of these characteristics of, again, both the individual user and then group and trip characteristics all kind of combine to determine what you're going to be needing to get out in front of as a park ranger, for example. So, there we go. Gorgeous. All right. This is a glacially sculpted valley. You can see that characteristic U shape, capital U shape, of the cross section from one side of the fjord to the other. Our activity in this case, not our mode of transport, but our activity in this case is canoeing. So, where we have long channelized water, either in ford or strait or river format, all of those are functionally equivalent in terms of grouping use, herding use, gathering use into this spot. It's equally valid to be hiking along a trail on either side of this, but it's a heck of a lot less effort and just as much, if not a lot more payoff, to be in the canoe instead of on the trail at the side of this body of water. Does that make sense? Okay. I see some heads nodding, so let's kind of dive into the brain and the individual recreationist characteristics, how we think, those cognitive factors. Why does it make sense that there's as much or more payoff being in a canoe versus on the path right next to, traveling in the same direction, in the same valley at the same time, on foot? Why is it more appealing?
Different dimensions. Where you can see, if you're on the side of the trail, you look to your right and see the water, but if you're in the canoe, you can see both the mountains and the water.
Okay, so a small change in location gives you a very different view shed resource. See how that works? Same area, completely different experience. What else?
Less work.
Less work. Yeah. We are like water droplets. We are path of least resistance creatures. Okay? Especially spring term senior year. Am I right? No. Anyway, So we're letting water do most of the work here, displacing us. If we're following a current, it's literally carrying us along and so forth. And you get to have your head on the swivel instead of being boxed in by a bunch of riverside or hydric soil. Vegetation tends to grow pretty thick and tangled and so forth. Here at Ozark Scenic Riverways, when we go there for the fall field trip, we see a gazillion scrubby little trashy sycamores just choking off both sides of the riverbank. And they're going to be around for a while, so it makes sense that everybody wants to be on the water, carried along by the current river. It's a fast-flowing river, aggressively spring-fed, you might say. And yet, it's purely a human decision process to prioritize, to want to get that canoe versus walk that trail. So that means we as recreation folks want to be thinking about, okay, so what is the path of least resistance? And what's an appropriate, not path of least resistance, but maybe lower resistance path, so to speak, not a literal physical path, but decision surface path, if you like, for a wilderness area or a wildland where it's intentionally not supposed to be a least resistance kind of place in the first place. So generally folks are going to be on ridge lines and get up and cruise along ridge lines. That's hard traveling. But the viewshed resource at the top on the spine of the ridge on a knife edge ridge line is really pretty good. Okay? So let's take a look at a couple other spots and see if we can get a sense of what this looks like. All right, so short video here. This is a GoPro attached to a fishing lure. In this case, it's in a quarry. This is a hugely landscaped, terraformed spot on the surface. There's nothing natural about this environment, but I'm sure to get a cool edit out of it for the gram. Okay? So what makes a person go to literally an old abandoned industrial site, like a quarry, instead of being the next person to go to Montauk State Park? At the upper end of the current river, there's a huge trout fishery there. They stock those rivers and a bunch of rivers nearby with those, millions of them per year. Fishing's pretty good in those spots. It's pretty busy, pretty crowded. So why would somebody do this? Like, it's probably not the cleanest water.
Hardly anybody there.
Hardly anybody there, yeah. So the file name for this little video I saved as PPV of 1. You're the only person around. So we make choices to go to maybe a more heavily modified landscape, a less natural place, even though we're managing parks to look and function as naturally as possible. High standard management. Remember that your visitors' motivations are different than yours as the manager. Their perceptions of this environment are different than yours as the manager. As a recreation ecologist, I see a quarry as a profoundly dead, heavily modified ecosystem. But if you like fishing, and if you know some fish are in that quarry, maybe they jumped in from the outlet stream or whatever, and you know you're going to be the only one there, that's a pretty good deal, okay? So what I'm trying to get at here is that we don't want to have visitors going after our blind spots, because we see, we value, we understand, we use and manipulate these landscapes very differently typically than our visitors do, based on our training and our management needs. Okay? Cool. All right, let's do a couple other ones. Let's see. I'll show this one again. We didn't have we were missing a couple people last Wednesday. This is at Horseshoe Bend in Arizona. This is over an hour before sunset. where the use level peaks because the sun sets right on top of Horseshoe Bend across the upper Colorado River there. It's a really pretty spot. That's kind of the opposite case of, let's see, let's pull it on Earth here. There we go. Horseshoe Bend. All right, so here's a little 2-lane highway. Just up the way, north is this way on this map, there's the small town of Page, Arizona. There's really not much to it. And Horseshoe Bend, as you can see from the air here, was literally, the access to it used to be this. Just a wide spot in the road to pull off, not even a parking lot. And then somebody posted on Instagram with a geotagged photo, metadata attached to the visual information, the pixel by pixel representation of what the sensor saw. We add to that GPS coordinates, and all of a sudden, this photo is a couple of years old, or this imagery is a couple of years old. They've now added, there's like a gate with like 3 lanes you can pull through and like talk to a ticket person and pay like $80 per vehicle. And over here, they've since built a string of like 15 or 18 toilets, just one after the other. You can imagine how that smells. All right. And then there's this little trail that used to be just like a wide spot between cacti, but it brings you to Horseshoe Bend and sort of the viewing area right here at the top of the cliffs. The sun sets right across kind of the middle top of the screen there. And it turns everything this beautiful, gorgeous, like bright, almost like a neon red. This is Red Rocks country. Add sunset to that. It's bananas. Okay? So, Horseshoe Bend. Is it a day trip, weekend trip, like a week plus kind of a place? It's not a park. So we want to be careful about that. It's just a site that is otherwise unmanaged by the Native American Nation and the state and the city of Page, Arizona. Everybody's kind of chipping in to just contain the problem so that fewer people die, because lots of people fall off that cliff every year. So, day trip, weekend trip, week plus.
Say day trip.
Day trip.
Because the town next to it probably don't have many spots to stay at. It's not like a campsite like you can many other parks are.
Yeah, that's
Maybe
right.
a weekend trip.
Yeah, there is no camp. You are not allowed to camp there, because that will lead to a whole other set of problems of people like stumbling out of their tent at 3 in the morning to take a whiz and taking a double gainer into the Colorado. So, totally a day trip kind of place. Let's take another look at this video just real quick. What's the level of specialization that, as the recreation managers hypothetically of this site, we need to be planning for high-skill people or low-skill people? High equipment, high technology, geared to the nines, or folks like in sandals and basketball shorts? Okay. Do these people likely have enough water? Okay. Do they have wag bags? Because this soil will take decades to turn that toilet paper that they leave on site. If they even bury it, it will take decades to take that chlorine-bleached cellulosic fiber and poop material and turn it into functional, biologically active soil. That's how little rain this place gets. And that's not a huge surprise, right? So what we can't see is that behind, so we got this is called an exclosure. We don't call them fences because we don't fence in people, recreation. We exclose visitors from trampling fragile vegetation, so exclosures. All right? Just like we don't use cages at a zoo, that's not humane. We use enclosures or habitats. Behind each one of these scrubby desert things like manzanita, Indian paintbrush, there's some cholla cactus out there, some invasive Russian sagebrush. Behind each one of those, we'd expect to find toilet paper flowers, because low specialization users are more likely to not understand how to leave no trace at a place like this, with low soil decomposition, like biological recycling availability, and so forth. Okay? When the wind picks up, like dawn and dusk, crepuscular wind cycles, right, as the earth heats up at variable rates over land and over water, we would expect that each one of these little gray-green splotches, the individual bushes, some of those which have toilet paper flowers attached to them, the wind picks up, and it's going to throw that toilet paper into somebody downwind's face. All right? So the solution here is along one of our 4 management strategies for the semester. Or maybe multiple, if we can find multiple sort of complementary things to do on site. We've suggested some of them with some of the hardenings or improvements that have been built recently to accommodate a couple million visitors a year, up from a couple of dozen a year. We can increase supply of the resource. Like, instead of one trail out to one sort of area where people can view, and everybody's kind of clustered together, you saw in that video, we could have 5 trails going out to different spots along Horseshoe Bend, and they're all pretty amazing. There's no bad seat in this house, right? We can increase supply and spread people out and maybe give folks more of a sense of solitude, like, this is my little chunk of Horseshoe Bend for the next 3 hours. We could modify use, that is, the timing, the location of use. We can do it directly by providing exclosures that sort of funnel you to one place or another, modifying use, where people go. We can modify use indirectly by educating people on site, either talking with visitors directly or posting up some information signs and so forth, and then trusting people to sort of make better informed decisions and not like poop and leave their toilet paper out there, not to chuck used diapers out into the Colorado River, because there are people down there at the bottom. The other side of Horseshoe Bend, right at this spot, is a very popular staging area for whitewater rafting trips and kayaking trips going through this section of the upper Colorado River, just upriver of the Grand Canyon. There's very commonly people down there. So if you throw anything even as small and light as a penny off of these cliffs, you can kill somebody down below. This is a perennial problem, a constant problem at places like the Grand Canyon, where you have busy folks up on the rim, lots and lots, hundreds, up to a few thousand folks, enjoying the views at the rim, and somebody throws a pebble off, and the trails zigzag down. They switch back down the cliff faces to drop 500, 1,000 feet at a time to get down to the next terrace down. And like, you can hit somebody on this segment of the trail, on that segment of the trail, on that segment of the trail. So kind of no matter where you throw something off of the rim of the Grand Canyon, you have an excellent chance of hitting and killing somebody. And that has happened many times. So that's also a potential issue out here if people are yeeting stuff out across the Colorado River and potentially hitting somebody below. They're far enough down there that you can't hear them, and you might see them if you're looking, but you're not automatically aware of people down below in sort of your kill zone if you're tossing stuff there. So if we educate folks and say, hey, there are people down there, don't throw anything ever for any reason off of the cliffs at Horseshoe Bend, most folks will modify their own behavior. And so that's maybe a little bit more popular than some of these direct things, like we don't want to feel fenced in. So we want to educate folks, we want to communicate with folks, help kind of modify that decision process, changing people's beliefs about this, ignorant beliefs about this being an uninhabited area, and thereby creating safety concerns. But for example, if you have somebody helping folks to understand, I don't know if Google Earth will even let us zoom in this far, but can you see all the visitor-created trails at the bottom side of the cliff? Right? This is heavily used down there as well. It's a target-rich environment for anybody careless enough to throw stuff off. So we can modify use indirectly with education or directly with things like, have you guys ever seen those like debris barriers on overpasses on the highway? Those are put up because people throw stuff off and kill motorists below. You know, when they shatter a windshield and the person panics and yanks their wheel in 70-mile-an-hour traffic and, you know, take out a school bus or whatever. We can modify behaviors directly. That's less popular, right? We don't want to be getting in people's faces, pulling guns, slapping handcuffs on people, but it does work. And in some cases, for certain kinds of recreation activities, direct modification is where it's at. All right, so again, we can change supply. We can modify use and users. The thought processes, the motivations, the beliefs, the attitudes, the perceived behavioral control. We have lots of knobs we can sort of attempt to twist gently and respectfully, inside people's heads to help them connect with a good motivation in a good way. All right, we can modify the resource. Okay? The people present here are modifying the resource of the vista, of the soundscape. It's not peaceful desert sounds here. It's like everybody and their sister and their, tia, abuela, and it's like everybody, all pressed together in this spot. It's a busy, crowded place. So we can change the resource if that's an issue, and we want to maybe augment our changes to the use or users by changing the physical environment somehow. So typically that takes the shape of making the resource more resistant to impacts. We can sometimes, in limited situations, make living resources more resilient from impacts, help them bounce back better. But typically the damage happens so quickly and so intensely that it's either we prevent it, we harden the resource, we armor it up against that, or it's not going to be able to bounce back in any reasonable time frame. And as a last resort, we can cut the use. These are our big 4 strategies. Everything we can think of basically boils down and files under one of those 4. Okay? So we can modify the use in space, modify the use in time. We can modify the thought processes indirectly. We can pave a trail that's eroding like crazy underfoot in a front country area. Not a wilderness, but everywhere else. If we really have to solve a problem that way, we can do it. And so forth. Putting in more trails, increasing the resource of infrastructure, your access to the area, can spread people out and divide the density of use by the number of additional units of resource you're supplying. So each, not additional mile of trail in the same network, but additional trails separately, they might be shorter or much longer. Those can help divide the use. Now typically everybody's going to go for the easiest, closest, cheapest, flattest one among trails. Like if you have 3 trails that are going to Horseshoe Bend and one of them is like a 15-mile hike and one of them is a 15-meter hike, we're going to get pretty uneven use across those 2 trails. So we can't just, throw money at our trail program and make this go away. We got to be pretty intentional and careful about it. But we can do those things. Okay? Cool. Any questions about our 4 big strategies? We're going to come back to these over and over and over for the rest of the semester. Now that we've started thinking about what our users are like, how they think, how they work, where they move, when they do it. Any questions about our 4 strategies? I introduced these in 220 Intro to Forest Rec, but we'll go a little bit harder on it this time. All right, so let's start picking this up a little bit more. This is at Ozark National Scenic Riverways. We have a sign near a paved trail. We might, in another context, call it a sidewalk, but it's not next to anything, it's just the trail. So it's a trail, not a sidewalk. And this sign is visible from the parking lot. Now think about that for a sec. We have to tell people who have arrived by vehicle there's no drinking on site, and by extension infer, hopefully, no drinking while driving as well. Alcohol ban. Consumption or possession of alcoholic beverages is prohibited on park property. Now that doesn't sound like American freedom to me. So we can infer that what has happened to bring us to this point? To the point that we have to, which strategy does completely prohibiting alcohol consumption fall under? Are we increasing supply of a resource? Modifying use, directly or indirectly? Yeah, that's pretty direct. That's on the face of it. Do not do this. That's off the list. You cannot tailgate along this trail. We're not really modifying the resource by putting this sign up here. We are potentially limiting use. Now, the distinction here is that we're going to call this, we're modifying use directly by limiting a particular activity. We are not limiting the number of people that can be present by issuing a set, finite, small number of permits. Anybody can still go along this trail. You just can't drink any beer or whiskey or moonshine or whatever while you're doing it, or Sterno if you have a real problem. So this is modifying use and users, not limiting use. Limiting use is extremely, extremely unpopular and is always to be treated, for this class and in real life, as the option of last resort. Like if everything else has failed, we got to shut down the area, or shut it down during certain seasons, for example. Maybe where the resource is more fragile and we just can't make it less fragile. So let's talk about signs for a sec. We've all seen a bunch of signs in parks before. We've got a couple of different things going on here. We can positively phrase the sign, or we can negatively phrase it. Do XYZ is positive. We'll call that prescriptive. Do not do XYZ is a proscription. So prescription is a yes. Proscription is a no in park management. While it is prescriptive or proscriptive, it is also either descriptive, it's setting a scene in a positive light or a negative light, and helping you understand these are the consequences of actions here, or it can be phrased as a command, which we'll call an injunction. So descriptive versus injunctive, it's one of those two, sometimes both. And at the same time, it is prescriptive or proscriptive. Combine those together in various ways, get different sort of flavors of sign, but they're all generally communicating the same thing. The reason that we're kind of splitting hairs for signs and other kinds of messaging, so this is a verbal thing as well, when you're doing visitor contacts, if you're a law enforcement ranger or conservation police officer, you can be positive or negative in your phrasing. You get different levels of compliance, and you're modifying people's sort of mental and emotional state differently with these different kinds of messages. So, how excited are you to encounter a sign that is proscriptive injunctive? A do not do XYZ. Do not step off this path. We'll give you a fine, for example. You excited to see that? Not so much. No, me neither. Like, I didn't come to a park to be told what not to do. Okay? But proscriptive injunctive signs are pretty effective. They're more effective than a descriptive prescriptive sign. So, prescriptive, proscriptive, descriptive, injunctive message. All right? A proscriptive, injunctive message is a frowny face emoji, but it's also a thumbs up. People don't like seeing these signs, but most folks will follow those signs. A very small, typically 1% of your visitors or fewer, will respond to that and flip it. That is, they say, don't drink alcohol here. Well, that's why I am drinking alcohol right here. Middle finger to the law. As Dr. Dre once rapped. Okay? So as a result, in parks, we very commonly see a few of these for specific hotspot problems and behaviors. And then way at the opposite end of the scale for a prescriptive, descriptive message, that's a smiley face. People like that. They're coming here to learn some stuff and to get some hiking in or some fishing in or some hunting or whatever. We give them a little bit more information. Now they understand the dynamics present a little bit. And again, most folks will modify their behavior in a pro-social way, in the way that the sign is trying to help them think about acting a little bit better. But it's less effective. Fewer people will respond in that positive way than versus regulatory language like this. Do not do XYZ, proscriptive injunctive message. So it's kind of so-so on effectiveness. We have studied these signs in parks by putting out different experimental treatments at busy trailheads, for example, where vegetation trampling is a huge problem on fragile vegetation and so forth. And tried like all of these different signs on successive days. So early in the morning, before anybody gets there, we get there, swap out the signs, and then we spend the entire rest of the day measuring a couple of things. How long do people spend reading these signs? Not very long. What's the actual effectiveness down the trail of describing that some of these plants are fragile and that previous footsteps have damaged the plants? And so by inference, by education, some folks will refrain from stepping on the plants and so forth. Okay? Turns out we get 2 to 3 seconds. On all of the signs you put at the trailhead, you get 2 to 3 seconds to convey a message. At like a 6th grade reading level, max. So you can't put a bunch of flowery, technical, like jargon, like expert level information on these signs. They got to be short and to the point. Otherwise, you lost them already. They're not reading your signs. They're scanning them. This is especially true since 2010, when everybody started sipping the world through a smartphone-sized straw instead of being present and not having a screen mediate all kinds of stuff. Smartphones modify the physical pathways in your brain to scan for interesting information and think about it less. Does that make sense? All right. This is important. The effect of smartphones on human cognition is extremely, extremely far-reaching. Extremely. All right, I'm ashamed to say I work for a couple of companies that capitalize on the human psychology of smartphones to deliver behavior modifications so that folks would buy stuff. All right, let's take a look at a couple more of these. Let's see. Here is a trail encounter at Bryce Canyon National Park experienced by one of our classes a couple of years ago. Bryce Canyon is, for those of you who've never been there, very, very hot and sunny and dry and exposed. And it's dusty. Let's go over to Bryce real quick. It's gorgeous. Bryce Canyon is considered one of the crown jewels of the American National Park System, and for good reason. There are thousands of these little rock chimneys called hoodoos. And we've all seen photos like this. Even if you've never been there before, I guarantee you've seen photos of Bryce Canyon. So let's check it out. It's not a very big park at all. It's actually kind of tiny. And the hoodoos are, let's see. Bryce Canyon City. There we go. Bryce Canyon is tiny. Like, this is a single parking lot. This is one of the biggest parking lots there, and it's not, like, that's plenty of cars, several dozen, but it's not thousands, like at the Grand Canyon, for example. And this place gets quite a bit of visitation, just like the Grand Canyon. Just look at that. Look at those colors. Look at the just really unusual geologic architecture on site. This is a really, really exceptional place. Okay? Now, most folks are going to be up along, there's a, you can see it here, this sort of rim path. It's several miles long. It's a nice little walk. There are bathrooms at each of the parking lots sort of strung along the way. And as you can see, some pretty intensively managed trails to get a subset of visitors out of their cars, away from those tour buses, and down into the canyon where it's, again, hot, dry, dusty, exposed. So all of that is the context for this brief little video. So we're walking on one of the trails down inside Bryce Canyon. And our entire class, about 30 people, are off to the side of the trail. We're not in the trail anymore. We're stopping our hike. We're on the downslope side because horses get really skeezed out when they have anything in a predatory position that is elevated above them. Horses see almost 360, but they see almost monochrome. They don't see color real well. And so things like shadows of leaves moving in the wind on the ground can be a lot more startling to a horse, which is a danger for the rider, than what you and I would consider to be dangerous conditions. It's harder for them to spot a mountain lion crouching, waiting to jump on their back and chew through their neck. Okay? So horses, as prey animals, are wired to be fairly skittish. We're on the downslope side. Now, for those of you who are equestrians, are horses good, efficient digesters, or do they eat a lot and poop a lot and only get a little of nutrition out of that? Anybody know? Anybody ride horses? Horses are so bad at digesting, you can get viable seeds from the business end. Like, it's kind of like how, like when you eat corn and then like 2 days later you're like, I don't remember having corn, when confronted with the evidence. It's like that with horses, but like multiplied by 10, okay? Like viable seeds coming through the body of the horse. They have to eat a ton. They produce a lot of roughage with poorly digested stuff, and horses poop everywhere. They poop a lot on these trails. And the poop on these trails, the feces, the piles, droppings, dries out and gets incorporated into the surface of the trail as horses walk across it, and gets incorporated into the dust that the horses kick up as they ride by hikers. And the hikers are getting powdered horse poop on their mucous membranes, in their ears, like the grit in their teeth. You can get pretty sick from that, right? This is a difficult situation, and it's one that happens literally every day at Bryce Canyon National Park and a lot of other places. Most every national park that I've ever worked at had combined horse and hiker trails because they're generally similar in their construction and needs. And so the horseback riders, they're having a nice ride. The hikers were having a nice hike. And then like, oh God, it's in my mouth. Ugh. But we've already drank all our water, so we can't wash it all out because it's hot and dry and exposed and dusty down in the canyon at Bryce Canyon. So, what do we do? This is a situation, again, that happens every single day at Bryce Canyon. What could we do? According to our 4 strategies, we could increase supply of the trail network, for example. Like, it'd be super sweet to have like a horse trail network and a people trail network, a hiking trail network. They're not the same thing, and they are not connected to each other, so you can't accidentally bring a bunch of horse poop over onto the other trail system being like, I didn't see the gate. Okay? So, what else could we do in terms of modifying use to remove a potentially dangerous condition for the horses if a hiker spooks a horse by not being high skill enough to know you have to go on the downslope side and remain very still? How can we modify use? How can we modify the resource? How could we limit use if we have to? What do you think?
Create little, I guess you call them pull-offs off the trail. Not very big, but it's enough for people to kind of get away from the area. But I know a lot of it's probably man-made at this point, but kind of like a little area you can stop.
Yeah, you can. All right. And for the horse trail intensive parts of this network, it's, you may not be able to see it here, but on every sharp turn on the switchbacks, this is the hiking trail side, because the horses need a bigger platform to be able to turn around, and they can't just like pivot on one heel like a hiker can and go in the other direction on the zigzag, the switchback as it's called. Horses need what's called a climbing turn. Just like mountain bikers, if you send mountain bikers on these steep trails with extremely sharp, almost 180-degree turns, they're going off and they're taking the fast way down in an unplanned rapid disassembly. Okay? So yeah, we can modify the resource, the infrastructure resource of the trail, to give folks kind of a step-aside area. Other places where the conflict isn't with horseback riders, but it's with people taking a picture, like everybody wants to take a picture at Glacier Point, for example, in Yosemite. You can create sort of a side-over area where it's clear that everybody who wants to take that picture, take those selfies, take the whole sequence of ones where like everybody jumps at the same time and you time it like you're floating, right? Those are called photo points or vista points, and they are separated from the trail but connected to it for exactly this reason. Okay? Now, we can't automatically increase supply and put in a second trail network because we have real tight what are called topographic constraints. There are just certain places where we're never going to be able to have a trail because it's vertical. And gosh, doesn't Bryce Canyon look like it has a bunch of places that are topographically constrained? Like we just can't put a trail everywhere here. So that kind of pushes separated trail networks lower on our list. We can't do that one first because there's just not a ton of different places. This is a dendritic structure. This is a tree, a branching structure up into each of these little sub-drainages. It's very hard to string together loop trails in a system like that without dynamiting and blasting rock and destroying parts of the canyon permanently for what, over the course of several centuries, is a temporary trail network. Okay? What else can we do? Was there anything we could do to modify use or users? Anything we could have the horseback riders do differently? You guys ever seen those, you often see them in parades, or like those carriages you can get in downtown St. Louis or Chicago? The horses are walking along with basically like a adult diaper kind of thing. And that's a little bit more unpleasant, for like the driver of the carriage and the people trying to have a romantic, moonlit stroll through the city and bright lights and all that. There's poop, and then we move into the airspace of the poop, and then we're continuously downwind from the poop. But that sure does solve a lot of poop piling up on Chicago and St. Louis streets. We could do the same thing here. Okay? Some horses can't tolerate that. Again, they're a little bit too skittish, so it might not be a good solution for all horses. But we could restrict use to only horses that are local already and that are pretty saddle broke by concessions, by contractors who bring folks out for trail rides and say, you have to use this horse because we know it's good to go with one of these diapers, for example. We know it's extremely not skittish. Some horses just DGAF, as the Zoomers say. All right? What else could we do? Anything in terms of limiting use? Again, always as a last resort. But what would limiting use in this situation be to resolve some of this conflict, some of this perceived safety problems, and like objectionable scent problems between hikers and horseback riders at Bryce? What would a limit use option look like?
Could you limit use by, like, saying from like the wet season, the rainy season, not having horse users out there, so that way water doesn't carry the poop to water sources, and that gives the time for like the air to kind of re-filter like all the horse droppings?
Ideally, yeah. Yeah, so for those of you listening on the recording, the idea is to limit use outside of the wet season here, which is not a super wet season, as you can imagine. In practice, E. coli and other encysting bacteria that can and protozoans that can wrap themselves in like a protein sheath and go dormant for a while, they can last in the soil and then eventually in the water column for up to 10 years. So, somebody's dog or horse or what have you, or, coked up meth head, pooped near a spring 8 years ago. You have no idea because that was 8 years ago, and all of a sudden you're sick, We could limit use on certain days and say, if you're here Monday, Wednesday, Friday, horseback ride your heart out. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, hikers. Sunday, everybody's fair game. Make sense? All right, cool. And as long as people know that, like as long as you let folks know beforehand, like effectively communicate that restriction, it's kind of fine. People generally understand that, okay, well, that's a pretty extreme thing to shut off the trails to a certain group of users half the time. It must be a pretty bad problem. So generally folks will ascribe to you, the park ranger, beneficial motives. That's good. That was very helpful. Excuse me. All right. Let's do one more. Also at Bryce Canyon, here is, instead of Horseshoe Bend, a sunset viewing location. The geometry, the direction that the canyon at Bryce faces makes it really, really nice for sunrise viewing. So here's one of several videos of a fairly diverse crowd at Bryce. It's like not even 5 a.m. yet here, to give you a sense. But our shadows are mighty long. This is right after the sun has crested the horizon. And you can see without needing something like a goofy oversaturation Instagram filter how insanely bright those rocks look during this, photographers call it power hour. Alpinists call it alpenglow. That bright orange color to the rocks based on sunrise or sunset. So, the issue here is crowding. What could Bryce Canyon management team do to alleviate the crowding here? We got our 4 strategies. What would increasing supply for sunrise viewing look like at Bryce?
Create more of those.
Yeah, these are expensive, right? They shaved off the top of the canyon. They cap it in color-matched concrete that's not open, bare rock. That is synthetic, but it looks close enough that if you're not paying attention at 4:30 in the morning because it's cold and gorgeous out, you're not going to look at that. It's color-matched with local material. Add more of these, more people can spread out across more of them. What happens when you don't have enough of these viewing sites, these photo spots and so forth? You can see them. Let's see if we can find any of them here. way is north. Yeah, here we go. People will head out to one of the points, find a bunch of other people there. So I believe that video was at Inspiration Point. That's what that looks like from the sky. You see this other path on the next little point over right here. Okay? That's people spreading out on their own. They're taking the increased supply option into their own hands, and they're going out where it's not color match concrete, it's loose gravel, and people fall down that cliff and die too. Make sense? So, if you aren't providing the right satisfactions to visitors' motivations, they'll modify the resource for you in a negative way and potentially hurt themselves, or it's worse when somebody falls and then somebody else like jumps after them and that person falls too. That very commonly happens in drowning situations at parks. And it's generally considered pretty avoidable, right? So we can see a lot of these visitor-created paths kind of all throughout this space, where Park Service just isn't interested in paving everything, so folks just split off and trample stuff, potentially fall off a cliff, and so forth. All right? Cool. So, what these different situations, what these individual sites within a park suggest in terms of the combinations, we're never just doing one thing, it's some combination of these. It's based on kind of the last part of visitors' cognitive processes, their internal mental processes, versus things that are just descriptors. This is, we're talking about more the outcome level type behavioral responses. So, in an ideal scenario, we've got the right resources, hardened or resilient to visitor impacts in the right ways, available at the right times of year, available from the right parking lots, easily accessible. The system works well when it works. When it doesn't, we get these three things. Rationalization, product shift, and displacement. We've seen the D word with wildlife responses, and that was considered a maladaptive response, a bad one, a decompensating response to increasing visitor pressure. We push them off of good habitat. We can do that same thing with people too, so we can consider them another wildlife species. And they do it the same ways that wildlife do. So, in order to get to rationalization where you have this horrible realization that, you know, the trip I thought I was going on to Bryce or the Grand Canyon or Little Grand Canyon here in Southern Illinois or Shawnee or wherever, the trip that I'm experiencing doesn't match my expectation. All right? So on the fly, I got to rationalize and say, you know what? It's fine. You know, let's go back to the campsite. We'll just make some coffee there. Like, this is a little bit too busy. Let's try again tomorrow morning, and we'll go a different spot and catch the sunrise there without 50 other people in our photo as well. Okay? That's rationalization. Rebuilding your model, your mental model of what's going on, what to expect, what to do. Okay? This is unpleasant. It's on site. If you've ever taken a class and you got slapped in the face with a surprise midterm or some quiz that just like bombed your grade, you're having to make some rationalizations on, okay, so this isn't what I thought it was going to be. Now what? And in a generally safe, well-controlled situation like a classroom for the most part, the rationalization is quick, it's unpleasant, but you make some hard choices like, oh man, I got to study more, or I got to catch this person during their office hours and just ask, what the heck was that quiz? I did not see that coming, and so forth. And you move on, right? In a park where you're out in the wildlands, exposed to weather and wild animals and other people and so forth, this can lead to some very bad problems. Bad problems when you're forced to make decisions on the fly with a rapidly changing mental model of what's even appropriate or safe or effective. Product shift is a negative impact of when we go to a park today. Ideally, it's going to be a heck of a lot like, almost identical to in all substantive ways, because the Park Service is preserving these national parks. We want to experience it as it was, or what it's being restored to. We don't want to go there and see and experience a bunch of paved stuff and the continuous line of drones and like tchotchke stands at each one of these vistas so you can get like the t-shirt for Sunset Point and Sunrise Point and all that stuff. Like, it needs to be what it was at the outset. We're here for the ageless geologic resource, the vistas and so forth, not for the visitor centers and the gift shops and the clever little pocket knives with people's first names like laser engraved on the handle and the shot glasses with Bryce Canyon National Park on it. Product shift is what happens when we let that stuff kind of get away from what is sensible and appropriate and just enough. Okay? So we can come in and try and solve problems with all this new like construction and development and stuff like that, but left unchecked, that changes the product that people are getting. It's no longer Bryce anymore. It's Bryce, sponsored by Walmart and brought to you by the American National Park Service with underwriting by, I don't know, Dow Chemical or something like that. Like, it's not a national park at that point anymore. It's not that set of experiences anymore. And people have a degraded ability to have a meaningful trip. And displacement is exactly as with wildlife, in time or space, temporary or permanent. If the habitat for viewing a particular vista isn't so good, they're going to displace sideways and look for the next viewing point on that same vista area, that same view shed. And if it happens enough, that's a lot of trampling, that's a lot of people falling down cliffs and so forth. If it's real bad, you say, honey, we are never coming here again. This is a waste of life that we will never get back. Permanent displacement is super bad. That's like, the wildlife equivalent of that would be population collapse. Okay? So, how do we get from visitors' attitudes, beliefs, perceived behavioral control, et cetera, to their motivation, to their actual behavior, and then from the behavior, experiencing the results or consequences of their choices and everybody else's on site? There's one more step we cover. First, crowding leads to any one of these three. Second, and not mutually exclusive from crowding, is conflict. So we'll talk a little bit about each of these for a bit. Use level and distribution in space across your map for your park and across time, days, weeks, years. Use level is just a bunch of numbers or rates. That is 500 people per hour at Sunrise Point all day long, day in, day out at Bryce Canyon, for example. It's just a number, right? It's just a data point. It's some characteristic of that space and how people choose it. Crowding is our personal, subjective, and normative, personal, subjective, and normative, evaluation or response to that use level, that use density. 500 people per sunset platform per hour, all right, which is just an objective number. Crowding is your sense of, man, that's too many people. I can't even, like, everybody's in my bubble. A stranger is touching me on each side of me, and somebody just brushed against my back, and that's like, I'm not okay with that. Somebody sneezed, and I felt the spray on the back of my neck. That's a crowding response. That's not okay, is it? Right? And everybody's crowding responses are going to be a little bit different, but they're going to be characteristically generally similar to each other. Okay? Crowding is totally subjective because, for example, we're okay with, I don't know, 20 people in this classroom right now. It's kind of fine, right? Like, it'd be a little bit weird if it was just any one of you and me talking at you for 2 hours. Like, I understand I can be a little bit overwhelming. And 2 hours of me talking at you for lecture solo, that's a lot. That's extra, like in the bad way, you know? But wouldn't that be a lower use level density for the classroom and the class? So it's subjective. It's context specific. For an area that looks like it's built to have 1,000 people on site at a time, crowding is able to handle lots of people. Let's take a look at the Old Faithful facility. So this is the built environment around the geothermal feature. And it's got these huge, like, platforms for everybody to kind of crowd around it and look. See? Look how built up that is. From the moment you walk on site there, you understand immediately, I'm not going to have Old Faithful to myself. And that's kind of fine, because it's built up for that. Okay? But that same number of people, let's say 1,000 people on site, is way too many at, how about, there's a lot of inspiration points. Point near me. Let's see if they do natural language parsing. There we go. Same number of people in the same space, so same use density, but at Inspiration Point, at LaRue Pine Hills on the Shawnee, not okay. It's not built for that. Does that make sense? So use density is an objective, factoid kind of number. It's a statistic. Okay? It has a lot to do with the physical capacity of a site. How big is it? How many bodies can you fit there? Crowding is the negative evaluation, the subjective negative personal evaluation. It's reflexive. You can't not make this decision. When your sense of the use level goes from this is okay, this is okay, this is okay, to too many, you tip over. And then you start displacing, getting away from the crowds. You start understanding, man, okay, I'm at this place, but shoot, it feels like I'm at Disney World instead of this beautiful, natural, wild place. Let's accept degraded crowding conditions because, you know what, everybody else is trying to have a good trip too, and it's okay, it's fine, I'm not mad, I'm just a little disappointed is all. You know, rationalization. You rebuild your mental model of what's going on. Okay? Crowding is entirely avoidable. So with a little bit of education, we can help people understand what to expect. And if what they expect matches what they experience, or if what they experience is even better than what they're led to expect, that's a win. So, without actually changing the on-site conditions at all, if people expect a bigger crowd, they feel less crowded, or they report feeling less crowded. They're much less likely to do decompensating behaviors like displacement, or product shifting, or rationalization on site, and getting themselves into some trouble or danger even. Okay? So this is fixable lots of different ways. So that would be modifying use indirectly by information and education instead of issuing a limited number of tickets to see Old Faithful, and locking a bunch of people out of that. Conflict is not just in people's heads. This is a whole other ball of wax. So let's get into conflict first. Let's open this up with, has anybody ever experienced anything negative as a result of a forester or park ranger or conservation police officer or other visitor while you were out hunting or fishing or camping or hiking or hang gliding or rock climbing or any kind of a negative experience in any way whatsoever, big or small?
A few years ago, I was out deer hunting, and I went back to my truck before I went to look for it, and there was a conservation officer there waiting for me because he heard me shoot. And so when I went out there, he asked to follow me back out, and I hadn't found the deer yet, so I couldn't tag it, and so I got a ticket because I hadn't tagged it immediately.
Okay.
It was a little bogus if you ask me, but
So you're just there to hunt, and you actually successfully hunted, right?
yeah.
And then, based on a less than ideal, unfortunate sequence of events, you got a ticket for doing the right thing. Okay. Anybody else? That's it. That's good. Anybody else?
I got pulled over for a taillight out by a crab orchard federal officer. It's kind of weird. I had fishing poles and everything. And never asked for a license or nothing. Just gave me a warning on the taillight.
Okay. I mean, at least it was just a warning. Oh, no. There I go, rationalizing. Tricky. Very tricky. Okay. Anybody else ever try to get a reservation or tickets to something? Not just forest and outdoor recreation, but like all the tickets were sold out or snapped up by scalpers or something? Like you got out-competed by somebody else, if you want to look at it that way, and you couldn't do what you wanted to do? Okay. That's another example of conflict. So, crowding is a huge problem at parks because most national parks are not enormous. They have huge visitation on the order of millions each in many cases. And within your national park, there are specific icon sites that everybody wants to go, and so crowding could be an issue there. But we can increase the supply. We can have more viewing platforms. We can have additional trails. We could, whatever, lots of ways, and we can inform our visitors before they hit that crowd of, hey, if you're here at an off-peak time, it's just as good, and you have to deal with way fewer other people. You can find a parking spot super easy, close to the trailhead, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? Information and education works on crowding really, really, really well, to the extent that you have enough supply of what people are shooting for. Conflict, on the other hand, implies an element of not just strife, but competition for things. Okay? So, that is, you and I have the same or similar motives, and so we're competing to have that experience, to connect with that site, to go on that hike, to catch that sunrise, to propose at the basalt cliffs at Acadia, and their waves are crashing against the rocks, and it's like that scene in The Little Mermaid and all that stuff. It's great, you know? But there's only a limited number of spots at any given day when you are ready to pop that question, and so you are inherently in conflict, potentially, or at least competition, with everybody else who's got any reason to be at that site at that time. Conflict is often asymmetric. So this is, if you want to think of the human species as another wildlife species and how we have each of these classes of resource within this course, and then the impacts characteristic of recreation management that we're trying to cope with, prevent, mitigate, etc. We're in the impact section for the human being. All right? Conflict is on or off site. So you could call it direct or indirect. And it is often asymmetric, which is a term that we usually see more in things like terrorism and guerrilla warfare. So this is like a somewhat less intense, hopefully less deadly version of terrorism or guerrilla warfare. These conflicts, they're not equal. They're not equally shared. They're not equally experienced from all involved parties. So, for example, when you are trying to fill up your tag for hunting season, maybe fill up your fridge, and you get back to your truck intending to go out and chase down that deer, but there's a conservation police officer waiting for you, and you get a ticket. The conservation police officer had more control over that situation than you, the hunter, did. Does that make sense? Like, that's their job, and they have a federal commission to, regulate hunting and all that stuff. And you don't necessarily have the same choices that they get in that situation. In a sense, that conservation police officer has a competitive advantage over you because they're functioning in their professional capacity. Okay? When you're at Bryce Canyon and you're a hiker and somebody else is riding by on their horse, in order to protect the safety of the rider, you, the hiker, have to make a choice to get down on the low slope or the downslope side of the trail, remain still, and, do the manly nod or the chin check as they ride on by without making a noise so as not to startle the horse, but at the same time, hold your space. You make eye contact. You don't look away until they're past you, and you make them feel bad for, getting a bunch of fecal coliform up in your sinuses. That's asymmetric. The horse rider can just kind of ride on by. They don't have to care about you. You have to care a lot about them. Okay? Those are both examples of on-site direct conflict. Like it's face-to-face conflict or face-to-horse conflict. Indirect conflict, so-called social values conflict, happens typically off-site. So this is stuff like your park has access by ferry, which is true for a couple different parks this semester. And that ferry necessarily has tickets. Some folks can afford those tickets without a second thought, and other folks will never be able to afford those tickets, right? Like a third of the world makes on average less than $1 a day, a couple $100 a year total, and that's like a lawyer can bill a couple $100 an hour. It's asymmetric in terms of purchasing power for those ferry tickets to your park, okay? And this is kind of invisible unless you're looking for it as a park ranger. Like if you notice that everybody through your front gate is like a professional or technical degree, or they're like, high-paid blue-collar worker, like welders, plumbers, HVAC, stuff like that, metallurgists. If those are the only people that can afford to get to your park, that's a real tiny slice of the population. And it's a pretty homogeneous slice of the population, and it's not good. It's not healthy for your park. So, you got to take a look at your park's policies this semester and obviously pay attention to the kinetic problems, the hot problems, the on-site stuff. Like somebody goes nuts and starts shooting up a lodge at your park. This happens very occasionally. Or somebody pulls a knife and starts stabbing other visitors, like just a genuinely disturbed person trying to hurt other people. That's on-site conflict, right? And it's generally asymmetric. Like one person's got a butcher knife and everybody else is like, they've got Patagonia puffy jackets. Like it's a one-sided fight, But the off-site stuff is much bigger, it's harder to see, and is kind of structurally baked with society just a little bit. So for example, an indirect conflict, a social values conflict for a lot of places out west at parks is motor vehicle use versus non-motor vehicle use. Like if you're dropping $50,000 to upgrade a 95 Jeep with, lift kit and snorkel and all the all the bells and whistles, all that stuff. You have a pretty good vested interest to go super hard out west. And somebody who just wants to go hiking in the same area out west, they're going to hear your engine revving. The Jeep person may not even understand that you're there. They might not even be aware of your presence. So you get subjected to the Jeep person's soundscape pollution, noise pollution, and water pollution with a cracked crankcase as they hit a rock in the middle of a stream and leak a bunch of petrochemicals into that water forever. Like, it's asymmetric. Does that make sense? Okay. So, one task we're going to have this semester coming up, probably not today, we're getting low on time, but one task we're going to have this semester is to consider what kind of, again, assuming that the direct on-site conflicts are pretty easy to spot, like a bunch of hikers pissed off at horseback riders, tearing up trails or whatever. And the horseback riders are like, what? I came here to ride. Like, if you want other trails, go somewhere else, So asymmetric on-site conflict. What might be the more subtle, the harder to spot social values conflict, where somebody else is out competing on money, or they have more clout with your state senators, for example. And so law or policy gets put in place around your park, and you have to accommodate a certain kind of use, right? So in northern New England, for example, we have the Vermont Association of Snow Travelers, VAST. And VAST is a highly organized lobbying organization. They exist to get more miles of snow machine trails so you can ramp off that reindeer, and have a good time. Interesting side note on snow machines in Vermont. There was a rash of beheadings when people were going out across like farm fields with 3 to 5 feet of snow, and they'd hit a wire fence at many dozens of miles an hour on their snow machines, and the top wire of the fence would separate the head from the neck like a cheese slicer, or like those deviled egg slicers, like the little wire. That's a thing. Like, that's the world we live in right now. That's not conflict. That's embarrassing, all right? Whatever. That doesn't have anything to do with anything. But lobbying organizations are powerful, and in American politics, money buys a lot. So, what user groups do you have across all of your users that are organized? In the state of Illinois, the Illinois equine industry is highly organized and handed the Forest Service its own butt in a series of pretty awesome court cases and got lots of horse trails miles built on the Shawnee and other places because they got some money. Like, they got together and said, we want more trails for us, and we're going to get them on our public lands. And so the Shawnee National Forest now provides many miles of some of the nicest horse trails I've ever seen. Okay? So, for next class, for Wednesday, we'll take a couple of minutes here at the end of class to brainstorm together in your group. What are some of the less obvious social values or indirect or off-site conflicts where your visitors are maybe organizing to gain an advantage over each other and sometimes even over you as the park staff? Okay? We got about 10 minutes left. Go ahead and hop into your groups and just have a quick chat about that. Take a couple of notes, and this is where we'll pick it up on Wednesday next time. Friendly reminder as you're getting your stuff together and to talk with your groups. We are coming up on our field trip, so just if you are doing that, you want to have a tent, nice warm sleeping bag, right? We're going to go in early November, and plenty of hopefully non-cotton clothes like fleece or your down puffy jacket or whatever. This is the Midwest in early winter, so it's going to be potentially a little bit moist. And cotton is not great with cold weather and moisture. I want you to be safe and comfortable on that trip, okay? Cool. Also, food prices are skyrocketing, like already, and it's going to get way worse later and into next year with all this logistics stuff and the bad potato crop we got and just all sorts of stuff conspiring to collapse Western civilization. So if you want to grab a couple of meals so that you don't have to buy anything from the super expensive camp store, non-perishable stuff, car camping food, maybe do that sooner rather than later, okay? Cool. All right. Spend the next couple of minutes chatting with your group, and other than that, I'm around for questions. Thank you.